You said statements either true or false. I gave you a statement, and you said it doesn't apply.
Not tooth apt.
It's not.
So only tooth apt statements would be either true or false.
So is it true that I'm talking to you? Is it true that it's a true statement? I'm talking to you. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Is it true that babies exist?
Well, I mean, how
babies
how
exist.
Go down the skeptical?
Babies exist. Babies exist. Is it true, or is it not the case that it's true?
I mean, if you want to go down if you want to be very strict about it, I would be skeptical of that.
Okay, we're done talking. There's no sense in having a conversation with someone who just can't even recognize the statement that babies exist. Well, yeah, blah blah blah. Give me a break. We're never going to get anywhere. He's not having a normal conversation. We're just going to move on to something else. It's ridiculous.
Well, he's not interested in a conversation.
No, he's just interested in arguing.
I am
in
interested
infinitum.
in
That's all.
I just know.
I just trapped him. Find out.
Dude.
I already decided. As soon as I said, how's he going to answer this? Would babies exist? If he gives me a hard time, we're just moving on. All
right.
John, you had something you want to say?
I was going to say, he doesn't want to have a conversation. No. You asked him a very simple question. Do babies exist? And he has to dodge that?
Well, I mean, if you want to be very strict, we would have to.
It's a simple question. It's like 2 plus 2. That's 2 plus 2. Okay? It's simple. It's simple. It's a simple freaking question. Come on.
Well,
freaking idiot.
It's not as simple as you want to make it.
John's a little fired
up. I'm going to lose it. I'm just going to lose it. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of these games. There's no such thing as babies.
We have to first demonstrate. Then we have
I kid you not, man. You guys will do anything you can to deny God. You will do anything. You will do anything to deny God. You guys are idiots.
I don't deny God.
So tell us what you really think, John.
He's saying it.
Telling you, man.
I'm very much aware of Matt's moral trickery.
All right.
So there's no babies.
This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
All right, we are live, Apologetics Live. Glad to have you with us, and I can't help but to enjoy that clip when I hear it. It doesn't matter what kind of bad mood I am. John losing it always puts me in a good mood. There's no babies. Oh, that's always so good. So welcome to Apologetics Live. We're here. This is before Good Friday, so we're going to be talking about an important thing coming up with Good Friday, and that is the resurrection, evidence for the resurrection. Let me bring in our guest apologist today. Alex, welcome to Apologetics Live. This is your first time on Apologetics Live.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. That clip was pretty funny, by the way.
Oh, it was great. That was it was funny listening to that live. Like when we and actually the best part, I was going to play the clip after that. Maybe I'll do it next week. After that's I have like an 8-minute clip of a guy who right after that conversation, a guy denies that babies exist. And then there's a guy who wants to argue. He asks Matt a question. He says, "Can you prove that God exists?" And Matt's like, "Well, what kind of proof?" And he basically, "Well, just prove it." And Matt goes, "The resurrection." And he's like, "That's not scientific." And Matt goes, "You didn't ask for scientific proof." And then we go on to explain that science can't be used to prove God because science is the study of the natural world and God is immaterial. So you can't use it. And it was funny because he just commented that the guy saying babies don't exist was foolish. And then he just went on to make himself look bad. It was like, oh, it was classic. We'll end the show. I'll play that longer clip for folks to enjoy at the end. So Alex, welcome on. Tell us, some folks will not know much about you. You and I have recently met because there's a group of urban evangelists that we're part of, and we're just trying to see how we can evangelize and reach out and do apologetics. And we've been trying to figure out how to do it in this new age we're in, where we're all stuck at home. So I had said, hey, you want to come on? And you jumped on it and said, yeah, let's do it. So why don't you tell folks about yourself and the ministry you got?
Yeah. Once again, glad to be here. And now is the best time to jump on programs like this, whether you're a guest or watching, because we got time. Although this has been an extremely busy week for me. So I'm actually getting my master's right now in apologetics. So I got a couple papers due, a couple tests. But prior to that, I trained a lot with Cross-Examine Instructors Academy with Frank Turek, Jim Warner Wallace, Greg Kokel, Sean McDowell, those guys. Did some training with RZIM. And about a couple years ago, I started a conference called the Proof for the Truth conference here in Chicago. This is our third year doing it this year. It was supposed to be at the end of this month, but obviously with everything that got pushed to the end of August. So if you go to my website, you can find information for that there. But yeah, I was in youth ministry prior to that. And I was also a pastor of education at a relatively large church here in the city until another pastor and I planted a house church a little over a year ago. So a lot of my heart and my passion now is making sure our young people understand, and I say youth and young adults, that there is evidence for why we believe what we believe, because the trend we see of young people walking away when they get to or through college is often because they haven't been given the proper tools to stand up to what a professor may say.
Yeah. So, and let me, the website up, let me put that back up. The website for your conference is, because you said go to the website, but for folks who are listening on the podcast, they can't see it on the bottom of the screen. So it is www.proofforthetruth.org. So proofforthetruth.org is the website to go to for that conference, which is happening into the month. Oh, wait, no. See, you guys just got to go online like everyone else. We're actually in the midst. I reached out to a friend of mine, Justin Peters, and I said, hey, because he called me like last week and said, so how's your speaking schedule going? And I said, all cleared up. He's like, fine, good. So we're like sitting around. He's like, we're just working on some, well, I'm doing a lot with my local church now, getting very active, teaching midweek Bible study, doing the preaching, and then we do a Friday night movie night, and I'm leading the discussion. So I've been real busy there, but Justin's been working on some videos and talks. And I said, why don't we try to do like an online one-day seminar like we've done before, and we travel around and do. And so we're actually working on that.
So I'm glad you said that. I forgot about this. So yeah, I lost several speaking engagements in the last month, obviously for the situation that we're in, but I am launching not a one day, but my first webinar at the beginning of May. And if you go to, this is a word, I think I should coin this word, bibliology.eventbrite.com. You can register there. So I am trying to do some more online stuff, and it's going to be dealing with hermeneutics and apologetics, kind of like a crash course, a beginning course.
Yeah. So where you said you're doing your master's in apologetics? Where at? At
Liberty University.
Okay. So yeah, you mentioned, and you're working with some guys that I know, Greg Kokel, Jim Wallace, good guys.
Yeah.
The conservative Jim Wallace, by the way, the Christian Jim Wallace.
Yeah.
He actually he couldn't go with using his name for his books, because it's like, wait, everyone's going to get confused with the other Jim Wallace, who's not a good theologian. So
yeah.
So let's talk. I mean, we're coming up on Resurrection Sunday. This is something that I think we see with a lot of folks, the fact that, every year people come around, you have Good Friday, you have Resurrection Sunday, they celebrate with family. Some people know the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
But,
Easter eggs, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. No, see, and I never followed that part either, because, I grew up Jewish, so I didn't understand, I didn't get all that stuff.
I don't either.
Yeah. And so, but the thing is that one of the things you see at this time of year is History Channel will always almost always have some shows, some programs on the resurrection, completely liberal, nothing historical. And it's just basically trying to argue the resurrection didn't happen. It's a fairy tale. So let's discuss this. Is there actual evidence that we can look to for the resurrection? What say you?
Absolutely. And that's what's actually amazing about it. And as a quick sidebar for everyone watching, most of those shows have already been debunked years before they air. So just a side note. But anyway, the evidence for the resurrection, when you really look at it, is so great that I almost feel like when we get to heaven, God's gonna be like, why was there even any doubt? As far as something that occurred in ancient history, there is more evidence for this event than for most other things that we take for granted. Things pertaining to Caesar, Socrates, Alexander the Great. No one questions those things. You've never been in a history class in school and said, I don't believe that about Alexander. The reason is it's not a head issue, it's a heart issue, in my opinion. And so the question is, if it is true, what does that require of me? That requires of me to submit to what is in the book. And that's the part where people essentially don't want to budge. So if people are more honest about that, then we can have a better conversation. But if they want to talk strictly about the evidence, let's get into some of that. Number one, there can't be a resurrection if there's no crucifixion. Even if we go back further, if Jesus didn't exist. Now, at this point in time, given the evidence we have, anybody who says Jesus didn't exist, like, I would cut the conversation off, because even atheists acknowledge that.
Well, let's, it was very interesting listening to Bart Ehrman. If you know who Bart Ehrman is, I'm sure if you say guys you have across.
I met him last year.
You know that name.
Oh yeah, I met him last year. I'm actually reading one of his books right now.
Oh, you poor thing. I've read several of his books.
Well, I'm dissecting it.
I think you read more of his books than me, and that's why you've lost your hair. I understand. I've lost a lot of it, but not all of it there. No, but Bart Ehrman was in a discussion with an atheist who basically just stated that there's no evidence that Jesus ever existed. And even Bart Ehrman was like, stop. Yep. Okay, we could disagree that, we don't think he was God, but you can't say he never existed. So
right.
Bart Ehrman, Bowser is like, no, you can't make that claim.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, and actually I was interviewing Jim Wallace on my channel a couple of days ago, and I met Bart Ehrman at a conference last year, and I talked with him. He's a really nice guy, actually, and he will say, and actually if you read his books, even with all the books he's written, all the bestsellers, he will tell you those the discrepancies that he likes to talk about. Those aren't the reason that he's not a Christian anymore. He said the reason is because he can't reconcile the problem of suffering or evil, which is a totally separate thing. And it's actually a much simpler problem to reconcile from a philosophical standpoint. But to the layperson, when you read those books, it seems like an open and shut case, especially since he says the consensus is. It's by no means the consensus. Actually, so this one book here, I don't know if you can see how thick that is. Yeah. It's called The Resurrection of Jesus by Mike Licona, who is a great historian. This, and there's more, but that one book is filled with evidence.
Yeah. Just to get to something you said there with Bart, I mean, it is interesting because, the issue he has, like you said, it's the easier one to reconcile.
Yep.
But then here's a little trick that, for anyone that wants to read Bart Ehrman, there's a little trick you have to pick up on. And if you read enough of them, you pick this up. Anytime he supports his arguments, it's usually right. But what you see him do is this. When he writes his scholarly work, he does do some good stuff. But when he writes to the masses, this is what he does. Well, the consensus says, wait a minute, hold it. That's actually a logical fallacy. It's, to appeal to authorities or appeal to popularity. And he does that a lot. And you'll notice in his reading, it's like he'll state something that's true. Like he'll say that the gospel, after the gospels were written and the New Testament, people were in a rush because of the gospel message. They were in a rush to get this out there and get it, in people's hands. So they were quick to make copies and they made mistakes. Well, that's actually true. We can agree with that. And he supports that. But then he makes a claim. And because of that, we can't know what the original said. Wait, no. Or actually, he'll say we can't know what the original means. Right? That's a big difference. I'll agree. We can't have the original documents that say this is what it actually was. But when it comes to meaning, I remember taking a course with Dan Wallace, and I asked him, I said, everyone uses the 1% of the textual variances that we have. We cannot get back to the original. And it's easy to get back to the original, most of them spelling mistakes, things like that. But the concerning areas are ones where the meaning of the text changes and we can't get back to the original. And I said, everyone says that's the 1%, but they're also saying that based off of older numbers of the manuscripts that we have. We have, everyone says we have 6,000. Well, we actually have like 8,000 to 9,000 now. And he said, the more manuscripts we got, that number's gone down. He said, we use the 1% as a conservative number, but it's actually closer to 1/5 of 1%.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so 99.98% accurate. I'll put that number up to CNN any day of the week.
Yep.
The Bible is more accurate.
And it's amazing that when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, they had a full copy, or in that discovery of those 600 documents, there was a full copy of Isaiah. Prior to that, I believe we only had 3 copies of Isaiah, and that was what was in the Bible. And so now is the chance. Hey, this has been buried for thousands of years. Do we have it right? And they compared it, and it was accurate to a degree of 99.5%. Which is insane, because we're talking Old Testament. So there was 7 variations when you look at Isaiah 53, and 3 of them were variations in the Hebrew word for light. A couple were contractions. Nothing doctrinally changed, theologically changed, or even based on the meaning. Nothing changed.
And so said that. I don't know if you've ever seen in his book Misquoting Jesus, the paperback edition, the first edition of the paperback. He had an addendum, and he took it out in the second printing. And the reason he took it out is because guys were using it. He stated there's not a single Christian doctrine that is affected by any of these manuscript variances. And it was like, boom. I mean, you quote him. There you go, Bart Ehrman. There you go. Yeah. And the Isaiah scroll that you referred to, the importance of that is we had several copies of Isaiah, but this was 1,000 years earlier than the earliest copy that we had.
Right.
That's a big deal, because now people say that given enough time, there'll be all these edits and changes. Mm-hmm. Now we can go back 1,000 years and nothing was changed. Oops. Right.
and that's the thing. So like I said, anybody who says Jesus didn't exist, stop. We can agree to disagree on some things, just don't make that objection. So let's move on to the crucifixion now. Ironically, maybe not so, this is actually not up for debate either. Gerd Ludemann, who's an atheist scholar, said that Jesus's death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. This is an atheist scholar saying this. And actually, Bart Ehrman affirms this as well. John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar, if anybody remembers that, he said very similar things. Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical can ever be. And this is somebody who has basically dismantled the Bible and kind of picks and chooses what we can take as authoritative or actual and not. So the crucifixion's actually not, by scholars at least, it's really not debatable. But you mentioned something at the beginning, and as I thought about this prior to our talk today, Jesus made what we would call an easily falsifiable claim. So embedded in every objection to the crucifixion or the resurrection in some way is they made it up, or it's fake, or there's some kind of conspiracy. It's just not real. Somewhere in the comment that's embedded in there. Now, if Jesus wanted to, he could have said, I will die and I will rise in a spiritual form in 3 days. And in 3 days, his disciples would say, I feel his presence and I think I saw him. And there'd be no one to really say yes or no. There would be no way to prove that either one way or the other. But Jesus said, I'm going to die and then I'm going to rise bodily. In other words, if I don't do this, then it didn't happen. If you don't see me walking around again in a bodily human form again, then that's not the resurrection I'm talking about. So now we have some tangible thing to really look for. So the easiest way to squash Christianity from the outset, all they had to do is go to the tomb, get his still dead body and drag it through the streets and say he's still dead. The only reason that was not a possibility is the body was not in the tomb. So now we move forward. Now skeptics and others have to explain, okay, we know he didn't resurrect because that can't be right. What are the reasons that the tomb is empty? So for a skeptic and for anyone listening that you want to be able to kind of explain this to your friends or relatives or anyone who's not saved or doesn't know how to explain this fact, this historical fact, it's okay. I was with Vince Vitale of RZIM, and he said, disagreement is okay, but disagreement without alternative is empty. So when somebody says, Andrew, I don't believe in God. Okay, well, what do you believe? Because we're here, there's a universe. You still have to explain what is. If you say, I don't believe in the resurrection, okay, well, you still have to come up with some explanation, a better explanation for why Christianity exists at all. Because to make the case that these group of Jewish men made this up for some kind of benefit, it falls flat. No one makes up a lie to have a worse life. I was with Jim Warner.
Yeah, finish.
No. Well, so Jim Warner Wallace, he's a detective in real life, for those that don't know. And he says he says every single murder he's ever investigated, and he's been on Dateline and all these shows, there's 3 motives: sex, money, or power. Same thing for conspiracies. Those are the motives. Like you just got to figure out which one or what combination. So the disciple, you're going to tell me the disciples made up this lie, knowing it was a lie, knowing he's still dead, in order to lose their power, to lose their family and friends, and to get tortured, martyred, and chased from town to town, and for no money. That makes absolutely no sense, and it's never been done in the history of the world. Why would that happen now?
So now you brought up something. I'm really curious. You said that in real life, Jim is a detective. So what's he in a fake life or fairy tale? I mean, because I'll give him a call and let him know what that you think he's a Christian fairy tale or something. Like I'm just trying to figure it out. But yeah, he is 20 years as a detective, cold case for much of it. But yeah, the thing is, and let me put this up. This is what James Watkins from Five Souls Ministries says, the Five Soul podcast. He says, the resurrection of Christ is a great defense of his deity against cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Absolutely.
That's very true. I mean, you always go to the resurrection. So when Alex, I don't know that you know my background and testimony, but when I came to Christ, it was more of a logical thing. It was just someone's explaining. He was going through prophecies. I was running the numbers. It was mathematically impossible. Statistical impossibility is 10 to the 48th power. And so we start adding these prophecies up. I ended up realizing it is statistically impossible for these things to happen by chance. I mean, there's some things going, okay, this is self-fulfilling. There's other things that I'm saying this is coincidence, and self-fulfilling I'm ignoring. Coincidence I'm looking at. I'm running the calculations. And so I ended up stopping Chuck and I said, Chuck, it's mathematically impossible for the New Testament not to have been written by God. what does it teach? So I don't exactly do things in the right order. I actually
that's a great order.
Testament before I believed in Christ. Now, at this time, I'm still being Jewish. I'm still thinking Jesus Christ is Hitler's God. I'm not looking for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
How I was raised. So, but it was really interesting because as he's going through, he's saying that we're all sinners. That was not difficult for me. I almost burned my house down twice. Once we put it out with a fire extinguisher, the second time the fire department. So I've got better at my sin as I got older. But, being a sinner wasn't hard for me to understand, but needing a savior was I thought my Judaism was going to save me. And so I didn't see a need for a savior. And Chuck is going through and we get to the resurrection. And as we're discussing the resurrection, I had never read, at that point in time, Josh McDowell's More Than a Carpenter or Evidence Demands a Verdict. But every one of the views, the false views of the resurrection, the ways to explain it away, I had every one of them, whether it was the wrong tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to go through each one of these with you so folks understand. Yeah. I'm going to let you answer them, but this, I'm not going to give the answers. I'll let you answer them. But the people, they got the wrong tomb. He didn't really die. The disciples stole the body. I mean, all the general ones. I still have one that's original with me. I haven't heard anyone else argue this one. It's kind of a play on the disciples stealing the body because he said that the disciples wouldn't have gotten past the guard. So this was my very last argument before I ended up bowing my knee to Christ because I couldn't explain away the resurrection. If he rose from the dead, he is God. If he's God, I'm accountable to him, and therefore I need to get right with him. So before doing that, here was the last pitch that I said, okay, Chuck, maybe the disciples, they dug a hole underneath the tomb, came up to the center, took his body and took it out. And Chuck looked at me and goes, in 3 days, Andrew, they didn't have heavy equipment back then. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I put my hands on my face and on my knees. And he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I just looked at him and said, if Jesus Christ rose from the dead, then he's God. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you for 3 hours. I said, yeah, but God, I'm accountable to him. And he said, right. I said, but I'm not in a good state. So right there, I just, on the steps of a Dairy Queen in San Francisco, I bowed my knee to Christ in 1984. So I was only 1 year old. It was a long time ago. Were you even born in 84?
I was.
Okay.
I was
1 year old.
I was not far from 1 year old at that time.
Yeah. Thanks. Vincent in the private chat is saying that I'm bad at math. I was 16 at the time. So let's go through those false views. I'll just let you take whichever order you want, but let's deal with all the views and then give the answers for them.
Yeah. So here's something that people need to take seriously, because I think the way you came to it is not the wrong way. I think you can come from an evidential point and then come the more theological point later. Everyone's not going to get saved coming to church on Sunday morning and hearing a nice sermon. That's great, but that's not how everyone comes. So we have to have criteria, and this is not just criteria for examining the Bible, the resurrection. This is how all historians engage in historical study. There has to be measurement sticks. So we look at explanatory scope based on the evidence. Do we have to have other theories to include in our current theory that we're investigating? Explanatory power. Does this make the evidence more probable? Whatever theory we're talking about, less contrived or less ad hoc. A philosophical term. That means I don't have to invent like 16 new theories to make this one thing work. Like you're digging under the tomb theory. And is it plausible? That one's probably the most easy or obvious one.
Give me some credit with that. The digging under that's original.
That was creative. I'll give you that. I hadn't heard that one.
I don't think anyone's heard that one. That's the thing. Like I've heard all these arguments. I think that's still original with me. I'm Josh McDowell could write that one into his next book. So I should actually mention that to Sean. I should contact Sean and say, hey, when your dad writes his next book, here's one that he hasn't answered yet.
It'll be just for you. It'll be the chapter for Andrew. So, okay, displaced body hypothesis. I think it was Joseph Klausner, I believe, in 1922, said that Joseph of Arimathea placed Jesus's body in his tomb, and that's well attested. I think also we need to make a side point. Every piece in Scripture, although I don't know that the gospel writers always knew, and probably they didn't, which is actually a sign of it being true, that what they were writing was so important. I think they were simply recording facts. So Joseph of Arimathea asked for the body, they buried it in his tomb. But it actually is really significant for us because he was a wealthy person. He was well known. That would have been a tomb that everybody would have known. So now we have really good evidence that everybody knew the burial location. It wasn't some random field. So then we can't say maybe the body was stolen. Maybe they did dig under it. But because of whose tomb it was, it's really clear that we know where to go look. So that's important. But the criminal's graveyard was some 100 yards away or so. And so the displaced body theory says they put him in Joseph Arimathea's tomb. He's digging a hole 50 feet.
Oh yeah, I put that people post in here. So don't be distracted by it. But yeah,
no, I was looking.
Yeah, John Wilkinson said Roman soldiers seeing disciples digging a hole 50 feet away from the grave. What you doing? I guess he's trying to say my digging doesn't work. I don't know why John would. I think it's a great argument. Just really,
it's not bad.
It's creative.
So the argument, the displaced body says they put him in Joseph's tomb, Arimathea's tomb, sealed it. But then in the middle of the night, they took him out of that tomb to put him in a different graveyard because he was a criminal. So they put him in the criminal graveyard. But this tomb was guarded. And it doesn't explain. So remember, explanatory scope, explanatory power, all these different things. Even if this was true, this would not explain why Christianity exists. So it would explain why the tomb is empty. But that's not the only thing you have to explain. You have to explain why these frightened disciples suddenly all of a sudden had this vigor to go evangelize and be willing to die for this Jesus that they had come to know, who they saw die, and they're telling people he's alive. And even if it's a lie, you keep that up for a second, but once you start feeling the pressure and the torture, you're like, okay, I was kidding. You don't continue to stick to it. So this lacks explanatory power. It doesn't explain the origin of Christianity. It lacks explanatory scope. It doesn't explain the appearances. So we haven't even got into that. There's at least there's several appearances where Jesus appeared, and Paul lets us know that he appeared to 500 people at one time, and that's going to be really important when we look at our next couple theories. So, and it's not plausible.
So one thing that we could say, right, with answering this is all they had to do was produce the body, correct?
Yeah. All they had to do.
All right.
All they had to do.
So the Jewish leaders who had Christ put to death, who were upset with, the claims he was making. Now there's claims he rose from the dead. They knew he made the claims because they wanted the guards to be at the tomb, because they said this is what he claimed. We don't want his disciples to steal the body and then say he rose from the dead. So they had it guarded.
Right.
If that theory was the case and he was taken from Joseph's tomb and put into the criminals, couldn't they just say to the guards who, remember, they paid the guards, they lied, they had told the guards to say the body was stolen, which could cost the guards their life. Wouldn't the Jews just instead say, who took it and where'd they go with it? Oh, there? Okay, well, grab the body. I mean, wouldn't that just solve the whole problem?
It would. It's the simplest solution, but that's the point. Occam's razor lets us know that when you're looking for the answer, it's usually the simplest solution. And if you have to go steps above that, and well, what if this and if this happened, and that could make this happen. And once you start doing all these combinations of random supposed theories, that's when we get kind of in the weeds. So you're right. Simple thing. Go get the body and show it to everybody. Case closed. Also, another translation, I don't know if it's in Matthew or Luke, but one of them says that the tomb was sealed from the outside. That's a whole nother thing that we haven't even addressed. So these disciples either were digging under the tomb, like you said, or they had chisels and they were working out the seal. Like, it gets a little far-fetched at this point.
Yeah, so let's explain that for folks who may not be so familiar. I mean, they may have read the scriptures that sealed, but just picture this scene. You have a tomb. It is built in the rock face. That's typically where the tombs would be of the more wealthy folks.
Right.
You have a 2,000-pound stone that what they would do is they'd put someone in. They would build these tombs with a stone that's wedged in. And then they put the body in and they pull the wedge out and 2,000 pounds rolls and covers it. And then you got to roll that up if they're going to put another body in there. So you have this big stone and they put a big clay X that basically stretch out. And so that's over it. So if you move that rock, it because the seal was broken. And then you have guards that are guarding it.
Right.
It's the Roman guards, which becomes interesting, right? Because it was a Jewish holiday and the Jewish guards couldn't guard it.
Right. Yep. It just, and just so we're clear, the Roman guards did not guard every tomb or every burial. This was a unique situation, right? So it's not like there's guards at every tomb. They would know there's guards at this tomb for this man who's in this tomb. Because something was special about this guy. So yeah, that one doesn't seem to pan out. Let's go to
what about that Jesus really didn't die?
That's exactly what I was going to.
Swoon theory. He lost a lot of blood. It was a hard day. He just passed out. And they prepared him for burial, and he just took the burial cloths off and walked himself out. Is that possible?
So the funny thing about that, whenever I hear it, is that would be a miracle too to me, because he before he went to the cross, he was beaten half to death. The type of punishment he endured probably would have killed most of us just by that. Forget the cross. So the swoon theory or the apparent death hypothesis, this is very popular with Muslims. In fact, in the Quran, I think it's Surah 4:157, it says, surely he did not die on the cross. They believe, most of them believe, that Judas took his place on the cross. Now, chronologically,
let me just clarify for folks that it's that, because it's even worse than that. It is the idea. It was not just that Judas took the place, and it's not necessarily Judas. The name Judas, not in the Quran, but in hadiths, and so not all Muslims would hold to the fact that it was Judas. But they do believe that God provided a lookalike.
Mm-hmm.
And so just with that, think about this in Islam. This is the thing I bring out to Muslims all the time. So your God is a God who deceives his own followers into believe, right? Because basically he convinced his own followers it was Jesus on the cross. So he took, whether it be Judas or someone else, and made it look like Jesus. So everyone thought it was Jesus, and it was his followers that he deceived, not the world. So when it says in the Quran that Allah is the great deceiver, and they'll try to argue that word in Arabic can mean planner. I've been told by Arabic speakers that it means deceiver. But I go, well, see, here's the evidence. He put a lookalike on the cross. Done.
Yeah. The most famous criminal in that time period, in that region, and everybody didn't recognize him. John, Peter, they're like, oh, that looks like Jesus. So that doesn't seem to pan out. But here's the thing. What people are, like I said, once again, all these theories are really trying to find backdoor ways to explain the empty tomb. But by doing that, you're affirming that the tomb was empty. So we're agreeing on that. But now you have a burden of proof to prove why the tomb is empty if you don't like my burden of proof. And actually, Gary Habermas probably the world's leading resurrection expert scholar. I took a class with him last year too. And he did research, and he found that 75% of scholars in Europe and America, and not necessarily Christian, actually Christian atheists, they affirm the empty tomb. 75% of scholars affirm the empty tomb. So this is actually not even really up for debate at this point in time either. But let's say we get back to the swoon theory. He was half dead. He went in the tomb. He fixed himself up and came back out, and then he was like, "Hey, I'm alive." But there is no testimony, whether in the Bible or in external sources, of a half dead, beaten, bloody Jesus walking through town saying he resurrected. Because what people have to realize is that if the swoon theory is true, it's not just that he's all better suddenly. It's that he still has the beating from being scourged. He'd still be half dead. There was no hospitals. There was no, modern medicine to be able to recuperate him. So
he didn't know about
we have to
distancing either.
About what?
He didn't know about social distancing either.
Right. Right.
I think I'm watching Andrew's face at the backstage. I think he just lost it on that statement. So again, but with the swoon theory, we have the same question to ask, right? Why couldn't they just find him? Right now, the swoon theory, for folks who don't know, this is the theory that's held by some that would believe in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which was the work that the book Da Vinci Code was based off of. The idea that Jesus actually, after his resurrection, he and Mary Magdalene got married. They went out to France. They had children, and those children are the line of the emperors of France, which gave them a greater, standing in the world as emperors because they were of the line of Jesus. The irony that I find with that is, I don't find many liberal scholars that question the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And the only copy we have of that gospel is in French, and missing than we actually have. So all we have of it is a translation. And because of the amount that's missing, the pages that are missing, we know that there's more missing than we actually have of it. And supposedly it's based off the fact that there's supposedly a deed that states that Mary and Jesus had a house together. There's one copy of that document, supposedly. There was a guy who wrote a book on all this, and he actually saw it, but the only way he was able to see this, he didn't know the language it was written in. He wasn't allowed to take a photo of it. He wasn't allowed to write down what it said, and he wasn't allowed to take anyone that knew the language. But the guy said it's true because he saw it. Mm-hmm. Hey, you ever hear of Joseph Smith? He saw plates too.
Yeah, there's a lot of lunacy out here, and it's what's most shocking is people's willingness to believe that or things like that. Rather than let's test and see, like, why you have to explain to me, someone would have to explain to me, once again, why the New Testament writers would go out of their way to write all they wrote. Luke says, I did a careful study, eyewitness accounts, I interviewed people. Why go through all that work to make up a lie to gain nothing? We can't overlook that fact. And there's two other factors with that that we'll get to in a second. But so this swoon theory, it's not plausible. He would still be half dead, and it would be very easy to spot, I think. It lacks
what a lot of people don't know is that the grave clothes he would have had on with the spices and all would have weighed about 75 pounds. So you got a guy who's been hanging by his hands and feet several hours, loss of blood, being scourged, being wrapped up, and now he's going to take off 75 pounds of cloth. He's going to untie himself. He's going to walk. He's going to lift a 2,000-pound stone, and he's going to walk past the guards without them recognizing, or they're not going to wake up from the stone being rolled away or anything like that. He's just going to walk past them and walk around. And you think that's not a miracle? I love how you said it. Oh, so you accept miracles because you accept miracles. I think that's how I'd probably. Next time I see that one on the street, I'm going to be like, "Oh, so you believe in miracles?"
Right.
And you can explain it that way. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's free.
So let's go with some of the. What are some of the other false views?
Yeah. So the next one we hear, and it used to be relatively popular, and actually, it was popular with brilliant men, brilliant thinkers, not just men and women. And this is what's so shocking about it. Even I believe Antony Flew held to this for a while before he became a deist of some kind. The mass hallucination theory. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's so ludicrous, but I'll just say this. Clinical psychologists, Gary Sibsey and others, and just think common sense. But he said this. He has surveyed professional literature, peer-reviewed, written books, talked to other psychologists, and is yet to find a single case of a mass or group hallucination. Well, it does not happen.
Okay, let's first define this for folks who may, folks who explain why the mass, it have to be a mass hallucination.
Yeah. So if I have a dream or even a hallucination.
Oh, now you think
that occurs in
Junior. Huh? Have a dream. Okay, I see how it is.
No, if I have, that is an independent, individual psychological event occurring in my brain, in my mind, with my neurons and synapses and all those different things. That is not an event I can share. I can tell someone about it, but they cannot experience what I'm experiencing. And the reason the theory came up at first is because, and this does happen, there is documented evidence for this, that if I really love someone and they die, I might in a week later just have a vision of them because I missed them so much that the remorse or the grief is making me visualize something that's not there. That happens, that's documented. But it's documented in an individual. When Paul writes, and this early Christian creed that is at the beginning of 1 Corinthians 15, Bart Ehrman himself says we can date that creed back to within a year or 3 years of the resurrection of Jesus, or of the supposed resurrection. So it's early. It was a creed that was circulating long before Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, that letter. So pretty much immediately, people were saying Jesus appeared to Peter, to James, to Cephas, to 500 people at once. And this is the sticking part. 500 people cannot have the same false hallucinogenic image. That just cannot happen. And I believe everybody pretty much knows that. But because we're trying to find weird ways to explain away the empty tomb, people come up with these theories. And so there is no psychologist of any stripe that I believe that would validate a group or mass hallucination. And this is the thing. Jesus appeared on several instances over the course of 50 days. He didn't just resurrect, say hi to his disciples and leave. He walked around, he ate, they touched him, he talked with people. The Emmaus Road, like there was interactions, days and days and days of interactions. If you are hallucinating, if it happens once. It doesn't happen every day with the same or different group of people seeing the same hallucination. That doesn't happen.
Let's deal with an argument being made by Jay Harry here. He says, we don't have 500 accounts, though. We only have one person saying there were 500 accounts.
Okay, perfect. So 2 different ways we can deal with that. Number one, when Paul writes that, and we'll look at Paul in a second, because that actually adds validity to the statement. But this Christian creed, that 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, depending on how far you want to go, he's quoting a creed that he learned, that he heard, that was being reported, like I said, and even atheist scholars will say, within 1 to 3 years, this was already well into circulation. But let's say that you don't even agree with that. Paul's saying, if you read that part of the 1 Corinthians 15, he says, the better part of who are still remaining, so although some have fallen asleep. Now, when you're making up a lie, you don't make up a lie where the people who can call you out on your lie are right next to you. So Paul is writing this saying, look, I'm writing that this happened. 500 people he appeared to at once. If you don't believe me, go ask them. He's allowing you to self-check him. Once again, if you're lying, if you're making up a lie, a conspiracy, you don't put that kind of burden of proof on yourself. The same way Jesus could have said, I will rise spiritually and not bodily. That's easy to say and not have to prove, because I guess it could have happened. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. There's no way to prove that. But when you make severe or strong claims that are easy to prove wrong by people who are currently in your surrounding, you only do that if you're positive that it is true. And so Paul says, as I'm writing this, most of them are still over there. You can go talk to them if you don't believe me. That speaks to some kind of validity.
Well,
But
let me give you some more evidence that, a different way of addressing this. It's the fact that the enemies of Christ and Christianity don't dispute it. Okay.
Yeah.
You could look at a Jewish historian like Josephus. He says that, matter of fact, resurrection happened, and that there were many who observed Christ afterwards. Now, what they try to do is then discredit Josephus. Oh, he was just working for Rome, and therefore he was doing it because of the Roman Catholic Church that came about several hundred years later, right? So Josephus is writing a history to help a church that doesn't exist yet. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But
he was dead 300 years before this started. So.
Yeah. But you could go, and this is the thing I find interesting, go to the Talmud. The Talmud was being written at the time of Christ and after Christ, and it is a response very much to what was going on within Christianity. And so when you see the Talmud, they do not say that the resurrection didn't happen. They in the Talmud talks about the resurrection, but it just discredits Jesus and says he did it by trickery. That it was, so the reality is his enemies don't disagree with it.
Right. On that note, there are at least 10 non-Christian writers who write about Jesus within 150 years of his life. During that same time, there are 9 authors or writers who write about Tiberius Caesar, the emperor. This is kind of weird because this is like more people writing about me than the president. Jesus is a carpenter from nowhere who built nothing. Something happened. So the fact that so many people are writing Suetonius, Mara Bar-Sapien, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, we can get into some of the primary source documents of them, later if we want. But I made a list one time. I don't know if I have it here. Hold on. Well, so here, listen, this is a brief list of the facts that we would know if, let's say, we didn't have the New Testament at all. Here's what we would still know about Jesus. This is crazy. That he lived during the time of Tiberius. He lived a virtuous life. This is their words. They call him a wonder worker. They don't say miracle. He had a brother named James. He was acclaimed to be the Messiah. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He was crucified on the eve of the Jewish Passover. Darkness and an earthquake occurred when he died. His disciples believed he rose from the dead. His disciples were willing to die for that belief. Christianity spread all the way to Rome, and his disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped him as God. This is what the non-Christian writers write about Christians and Christianity and Christ. If we had only their writings, we would still know all those things.
And I think what you did there is answer. Jay Harry is trying to argue, well, that's just anecdotal. By the same logic, every person claiming to be abducted by an alien must have been abducted. I think the problem is that the guys say they're abducted by aliens, don't say, here's 500 people you can go verify it with. Okay. Mm-hmm. They don't have other people that verify that they were abducted by aliens. It's just themselves doing it. In fact,
right.
I could claim Jay Harry got abducted by aliens, and that's why he believes what he believes. By his argument, he can't say I'm wrong.
Right.
So yeah. Listen, what are some more of the, I know, so there's someone that wants to come in and ask some questions of both of us, I think. But
Yeah.
what are some of the other arguments for, or some of the false views of the resurrection?
Yeah. So I'll deal with one more, and then we'll deal with the resurrection, because I want to evaluate that too by the same standards: scope, power, plausibility, less ad hoc. I don't want to leave that out. I want to see, does that stand up to the test? And I think that's fair. The conspiracy theory, and a lot of the things that are coming are versions of some sort of conspiracy. But once again, you have to explain, why would there be a reason for a conspiracy? You got to imagine, before Jesus came, these Jewish men were good. They thought they're good with God. They were looking for the Messiah, but they weren't needing to force the situation. They had a good life. They were good with God. They were still his people. They were under Roman rule, but it wasn't worth leaving that to go be martyred, to make up a lie. So the conspiracy theory is difficult for several reasons. And I'm going to go back to Jim Warner Wallace, and he cites in one of his books 5 things that you need to make a successful conspiracy. And we can see if those things existed. By the way, if you know about the conspiracy, it didn't work. That's a simple way. But number one, you need a small number of conspirators. When I say small, you need like 2 or less. Well, you can't have less. 2 is good. And actually, Jim was saying, if you have the 2, the best way to make it work is they conspire, and then right after they get done, one kills the other one.
And the reason he says this is, and now remember, for folks who may not know, Jim is a cold case detective. It's one of the things, actually, his expertise is in identifying solid eyewitness testimony. That's that's where he is a world expert. That's why he does cold cases, because they're all based on eyewitness testimony and being able to spot what's really eyewitness testimony. And his thing is, he'll say, first thing, he gets called up middle of the night, we got a homicide, we got whatever, we got 2 witnesses. The first thing he says is separate the witnesses.
Yes.
Because once they conspire, it's really interesting. One of the things he says that is always true with a conspiracy is their stories perfectly align.
Absolutely.
And that's the very complaint everyone has with the Gospels, that there's the storylines are the same, but some people focus on, here's 10 people that are healed, and this one gives the same account, only focuses on 1 that was healed. Okay. Doesn't mean the other 9 weren't there.
Right.
It means one author focused on 1. That's good eyewitness testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And the more people you have, it is harder to keep a conspiracy. I mean, it's impossible. Coronavirus thing. There was people saying, this is a conspiracy. I'm going, how in the world you get China, Iran, Russia, the US, the UK, the France, and they're all in on it?
Right.
Conspiracy doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. It's never worked. The only conspiracies we've heard of are the ones that almost worked. And the reason they almost worked is because they kept it for a while. But listen, I worked with youth for a long time, and man, I'm not even a hardcore detective or anything like that. I can get 2 kids, and one of them is going to tell me the truth pretty quickly. And there's no torture. I'm not doing anything to compel them. So and when I say small number of conspirators, like 2, maybe 3, but we have to imagine that in the upper room, there's 120. But let's forget about them for a second. Let's just take the 11 remaining disciples. That's too many. That's too many to have a conspiracy, but that's just one factor. Number 2, you need great communication. Now, there was no cell phones, email, Twitter. There was none of that stuff, obviously. So communication depended upon if you're with somebody, or if you write a letter and they receive it. But we know generally where the disciples went. We definitely know where most of them died. We know Thomas died bringing the gospel to India. Matthew and Mark were in Ethiopia and Egypt. Paul makes it to Rome. Luke is hanged in Greece. They're all over. So here's the point. If they're all in on this lie, this conspiracy, Mark is not going to know if Thomas gave up the lie when he's in interrogation. And so, independent of each other, in separate locations, thousands of miles apart, they all kept this same belief until the very end. No one recanted, even under immense pressure and torture. That leads to the belief that it's true. Number 3, you need a short time span. a short time span. The earliest.
Before you get to the short time span, again, these guys died without getting power, without getting prestige, without getting money, right? I mean, they didn't get anything out of this.
Right.
So if it was a conspiracy, the question always asked is, why do it if you got nothing out of it? Right? Typically what happens is when you see that someone's not getting anything out of it, they turn to try to get something. When that's their motivation, is to get something out of it.
Yep.
And they're not getting it, they turn on it. And that's why conspiracies break down, because someone's trying, conspiracies happen because someone's trying to get something for themselves. If they're not getting it through the conspiracy, they turn, expose the conspiracy, try to get it that way.
Yeah.
Got 11 guys that got nothing out of it.
Yeah. And it grew. And so you need a short time span. The earliest New Testament letters by Paul, late 40s, early 50s, depending on how you date things. But the bottom line is, it wasn't based on the writings initially. So the times that if it was fake or a conspiracy, but before anything was ever written, this thing would have died out. You need close friendships. Now, they probably had close friendships, but they weren't physically close. So Paul can't call, or Matthew can't call Mark on the phone and say, they got something, they got dead. Well, okay.
McElroy says they got something out of it, they got dead.
Yeah.
Let's do this. I mean, yeah, we need a short period of time, because the longer the conspiracy continues, the harder it is to keep. Jess is asking this, and I think that maybe she doesn't understand. You can explain this, but she says, since most all of their deaths of the disciples recorded biblically, I think she's asking, because you said we know where they died, but that's not recorded in the Bible. So how do we know that information? And then after that, get into the defense of the actual resurrection that did occur.
Yeah, I forgot the name, but that was a great question, and that's really important. So I'm going to direct, because this is a lot of information to go to that part. Josephus gives us some, other external sources give us some. We know that church tradition holds, based on what was written, that Peter was crucified upside down. We know how Paul died, by being beheaded. But the person that you should look to, Sean McDowell, he did his dissertation on the death of the disciples. And probably in the world, he's probably done more research on that topic than anybody else I know. And I actually, this is funny, at one of my training sessions, I gave a presentation where he was my evaluator. And that was my topic. And this was before I knew that was his area. And I was going in for my, killer evidence. And it was just funny to present to the one guy in the world who knows it better than anyone else.
Well, see, I've toyed with the idea of going to the cross-examined, especially when we had it in New York.
Mm.
My idea is I am thinking of maybe one year I'll do it, but what I would do is I'd talk to Frank and say, listen, there's one thing I want to do. And that's after all these guys get done being taught how to do apologetics, let me take them all to Union Square. And Vocab Malone. Vocab was at the training. He came out, and it's actually the only time Vocab and I met each other in person, because that's where I do open air. And you could sit in front of Sean McDowell and give your arguments. Yeah. But it's very different when you're sitting in the streets in New York and you got like 20 people shouting out arguments at you, and you're trying to control them. So my theory is I want to say to Frank, like, okay, you got your training, you give your test, but let me take everyone on the street. We'll give them a final exam.
Yeah, that's a final exam. All right. So
defend the resurrection.
Okay. And the last point on the conspiracy is you need low pressure. And what we know, this is in the Bible, that they did not have low pressure. They were being pressured. Just look at what Paul was going through. James's death is recorded in the Bible, not James, the brother of Jesus, but the other James. So yeah, we have that evidence. Okay, so let's talk about the resurrection. Let's examine
okay, real quick, since to stay on topic, Jess was asking where is the Bible verse about Paul being beheaded? And I don't think that that's in the scriptures.
No.
The book of Acts ends before he's dead. There's two reasons why we think he was beheaded. We know he was in Rome. It's recorded that he did die at execution. As a Roman citizen, he could not have been crucified because that would have been illegal.
Right.
The way that they would have killed a Roman citizen that was sentenced to death was beheading. And so I don't know if it actually states that we have history that states that he was beheaded. I know that we have historical documents that say he was executed.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it actually says beheading. I think the beheading itself, actually, we assume.
Yeah.
Just,
and the early that was the assumption even with the early church fathers, and so we're talking like 100 to 150 AD, not far removed. So with the resurrection, if we look at four kind of lanes, we talked about the crucifixion. It's a pretty solid fact. Let's talk about we talked about the appearances. So I'm not going to rehash that. The fact that we have record of appearances, record of appearance to at least one time to 500 people, and that's not even the most important of the appearances. It just helps to validate. But let's talk about this, and this is actually even probably more important than the fact that whether Paul was beheaded or not. And I hope most people know this, but some might not know this. Paul was not always Paul. Paul was Saul. So one lane of evidence, and this a lot of atheists say that this is the hardest one to overcome. The skeptics who turned to become leaders of the church, because when Paul was Saul, he was a Pharisee, he was a leader in his religion. He had nothing. He was out bringing Christians in to do the work of God. He thought this was a heretical faith and religion. He thought he was doing the work of God by eliminating this sect called Followers of the Way. So there's no way to explain his sudden conversion to the enemy's team, so to speak, to be a Christian, where if you look at 2 Corinthians 11, he talks about I've been shipwrecked, beat, left for dead, tortured, left hungry, left cold. Like he goes through a whole list and he says, yet I do all this because of what I believe. So it was outside the Bible. Yeah, it was outside the Bible. Yep. So the conversion of Saul to Paul is inexplicable outside of not just the resurrection, but his appearance or his the appearance of Jesus to him. It would take, I always say, some people aren't going to just come to church on Sunday and get saved. Some people need a Saul to Paul moment. They need to be literally knocked down, hit on the head. It's got to be extreme. So that's one. Now, the other one that we don't talk about a lot is James. And James has a book in the Bible called James. But this James is the half brother of Jesus. There's another one named Jude who's in there as well. And if you look in John chapter 7, also I think in Matthew 13, it says, they're questioning who is this Jesus? And they say, isn't he the son of Joseph and Mary? And aren't his brothers? And they list them, and his sisters, they list them. James, his brothers, they made fun of Jesus. John chapter 7 says they mocked him. They didn't believe he was the Messiah. Now you got to picture this. If your brother is the Messiah, you're up late studying. He's blinking and getting an A on the test.
Could you picture having Jesus as your brother? I mean, seriously, I thought about this. Could you picture, just picture what it's like being in the family with Jesus? I mean, here's Mary. Can you be like your brother Jesus? He never does anything wrong, right? I mean, what a standard. He's not only the firstborn in the family, he's perfect. He never sins. It's like, wow, okay. I mean, I understand why they weren't happy with him.
Yeah. So, yeah, on John, I think John 7, they're like, well, you're so great. Why don't you go down there and do some more miracles? And they're making fun of him. The mockery, it's in the Bible. But something happened. something happens where James becomes the same brother who mocked him becomes a leader in the church, ends up being martyred as well, writes the book of, or the letter of James is in our Bible. Once again, skeptics and atheist scholars have a hard time explaining these two individuals if the resurrection is not historical fact. So the lane of the skeptics is a huge issue. And then, like I said, the empty tomb. Now, one thing we didn't talk about the empty tomb is that in Matthew 28:11-15, it talks about that the Jewish leaders paid off the guards to say the disciples stole the body. And it says, this saying is commonly reported to this very day.
Yep.
The truth is in the details. When you read the Bible, you have to question. And I think if you're open, if you're honestly open, some people are not honestly open. They say they're open, but they're not honestly open. If you remove any presupposition against the supernatural and say, okay, let me just see, does this make sense based on what I see in the text, what evidence exists, and why this would have happened or not happened? We've already covered that the disciples gained nothing, lost everything. But there's certain details, and I've written some stuff and I've done some speaking on something called undesigned coincidences. This is not one, but this is just another lane of evidence. An undesigned coincidence, back to being a detective, is something where if you have several witnesses and Jim separates them and all that, and you're interviewing this witness and they're not even trying to deceive you, but they're just talking, and then in the course of them talking, they say something that seems, doesn't really make much of a difference, but you're writing it down. And then you're interviewing another witness and they say something and it's not a big deal. They say a blue hat was on the ground. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but you write it down. And when you put everything together, they don't know, not even that they were in collusion, but they don't know that all those pieces that they gave just nonchalantly actually make the whole story work and fit together. What you find in scripture with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John especially are certain undesigned coincidences that some little line in John will give clarity to something that you're questioning about. Why was this person there, or whatever the case is in Luke? And that's what was happening. And it all makes sense. And that doesn't speak of collusion. That speaks of a happy accident, really. It speaks of the fact that they were simply writing what they thought to write and writing what they saw and or experienced, were eyewitnesses of, or interview people to ascertain. And us, with the benefit of hindsight and having the total corpus of scripture to look at, we can parse through it and dissect it and say, oh man, like this has to be God, because who else could connect all these dots? There's no way that they premeditated how to make this cosine this, where we find something else in scripture. So if you remove the presuppositions against the supernatural, the resurrection hypothesis has explanatory scope. It explains the most evidence in a singular fashion. It has explanatory power. It's less ad hoc. We don't have to invent new theories. We simply have to believe what is in the text. And not just because it's in the text, but because when we examine everything and we try to think through all the alternative scenarios, this is the only one that it's a straight line. And it's less contrived. So based upon the evidence, based upon the text, based upon the external evidence, based upon the plausibility of other theories, this is why evidentially we can come to align with the resurrection hypothesis.
So you're saying the History Channel's wrong? Yeah, all that just to say that, really? Right. And for folks are there's some folks commenting, you would not be, or let me ask it as a question, would you be more of an evidential apologist or presuppositional apologist?
Me personally, evidential.
Okay. And so I say that just because some folks kind of find it, they're like, I'm a presup guy. And people think like we can't get along. Now, folks that I want folks to listen, notice Alex is not giving evidence for God. He's giving evidence of a resurrection. Okay. So there's a difference. We there's this view within presup that we can't have evidence. No, we do look at evidence as well.
Right.
The issue is we don't give up that. I always say this, there's two presuppositions that I hold to. God exists. He has spoken. Those two. So I'm not going to give up God's existence. I'm not going to give up his word. And notice that Alex is not doing that either here. Alex is giving you what the scripture says, but there's nothing that stops us from looking beyond scripture to say, here's outside evidences that support what the scriptures say.
Right.
That's not giving up scripture. Okay.
Right.
So, I just want to point that out because people are like, we're commenting. I want to bring Nicholas in. He's been waiting. He's got some about the Old Testament and some questions on the resurrection. So, Nicholas, if you're there, you can unmute yourself. I know he was on camera earlier. We'll give him a little bit. There you go. Nicholas, welcome. You got to unmute yourself as he's working. Okay, there we go.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm not trying to be ominous and in the dark or anything.
No, we understand. You want the picture of the world map behind you because you're just trying to show you're more mission oriented than us. I mean, look, you guys may not have been seeing the comments, but I've been seeing the comments about the fact that people are commenting that Alex right now has more books on his very small bookshelf behind him there than I have on mine. And I understand that. I understand some of you guys are just having fun. But someone in the private chat, Vincent, had said he can't trust me because I have no books on my shelf. Okay, so I understand, Nicholas, you're trying to show that you're more spiritual than both of us because you don't have books, you have a world map.
Well, I figured I might as well try and compete with Matt Slick's humbleness, right?
Yeah, well, humility.
All right. So my question is from just in Genesis 6:5, something I've been thinking about for a while. But with God being sovereign, right, when he created man in the world and knowing that we would sin and so forth, why in that text before he, tells Noah, comes to Noah and so forth, does it say that like it grieved him and then he regretted that he made him, made man?
Let's start in verse 1 of chapter 6.
Yeah.
Read those 5 verses. Actually, let me just read it back to ESV. It says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And then verse 5, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted, this is verse 6, the Lord regretted that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man from whom I've created from the face of the land, animals, man and animals and creeping things, birds and heaven of the heavens, for I am sorry that I made them. But Noah found favor in his eyes. So your question is in verse 6, this idea of God regretting. Okay.
Yeah, based on his knowing already.
Okay. So let's, and this is why it's always important to look at the context first off, because this context makes it very clear what's happening, right? Now there's going to be differing views of who are sons of God and the daughters of men. Okay. I actually don't know where Alex will come down on this, but the Jewish tradition and view that's held by many. You brought up Matt Slick. Matt agrees with this as well as I do. I'm not super. I could be convinced otherwise, but I believe that the sons of God is used to refer to angels. So in some form, it seems like these were angels that were either physically able to have offspring with women or having relations with women, or it may have been demon-possessed men that were doing such. But whatever was going on there, it was so wicked that it caused God to bring about a worldwide global flood. Okay, so right there you see that this is not something normal. It's not something that is just God said, "Up, they're being bad." This is some sort of supernatural wickedness. Do you see that from the context, at least? Even if there's people who try to say that it's the line of Seth and the line, of Cain. If you read the context, there's nowhere does it mention anything about Cain or Seth.
No.
So I don't think that's people I think reading into some because they don't want to. Typically, they just don't want to accept that it could be some sort of demonic activity. But
Right.
when we look at this word that is used here in the ESV as regret, or later in verse 7, I am sorry. This word has a couple different meanings. It actually means regret, to be sorry, to console oneself, or to comfort, to lament, to groan, to grieve. So there's actually a wide range of usage. Now, the idea we think of regret means, he changed his mind on it. And that's not the case here. Okay. He knew all along this would happen, but it still grieved him when it did happen.
Right.
Now, Nicholas, I don't know. Do you have any kids?
I do. My son Elijah, who's just over 5 months now.
5 months. So you'll get to understand this illustration. Even a couple of years, and you're going to fully understand this illustration.
Right.
As a parent, there's times where we put things for our kids to do. And like, not that we're God, we're not all knowing, but your kids well enough. You know that there's times they're just going to do something they shouldn't do.
Right.
And as they're doing it, it grieves you, even though you kind of expected they would do it. It still hurts you that they chose to do that.
Right. And that makes sense. And what you mentioned earlier too, just with the context and everything, and that's something I've wrestled with too, is like, is it literally like the sons of God in the terms of angels, or was it like sons of God? Because I've also heard the other sons of God meaning like maybe people that were actually right, like Noah, righteous men who were. I don't know where I heard that from. It might have been on here from somebody. But yeah.
Yeah, Alex, what's your view on it?
Yeah, my view. So the sons of God is kind of misleading because it's not, when you think sons of God, you're thinking holiness, but the sons of God would in my estimation be fallen angels. Mm-hmm. Even when you look at the beginning of Job, the council that is there is referred to in similar language, but it's not holy angels. And so what I see as the ultimate thing, because we know from Genesis 3:15, God is sending forth the Savior through a certain bloodline, right, that he's going to establish. But there's so much wickedness because of these fallen angels that God has to essentially purify the bloodline, because this promise still has to be fulfilled for redemption. And because of this intermarriage that was happening, he's going to have to create the bloodline to come through Noah through a righteous source, so that he can eventually get through all the generations to get up to Jesus. But I think that's what's significant in this, because it's not, I agree. I don't think anything about Seth or Cain, or I think people are, making it too allegorical at that point. But I think it is fallen angels that are now somehow in the earth able to coincide with these women, and it is tainting not just the earth but the bloodline that the Messiah is going to have to come through.
Oh, cool. Thanks for answering my question, Andrew, and letting me ask. One for you, Alex, was just you were bringing up some non-Christian sources other sources talking about like the fact that I think they wrote to Caesar or something like that, just about like how the sky went dark and all that stuff after Jesus died and all of that. What were some of those sources? Just like the names of the guys.
Yeah, the Suetonius, Suetonius. You probably know of Josephus. Tacitus was another historian. Pliny the Younger, Pliny the Younger. Mara Bar Serapion, I think. It's Mara, Mara Sarapion. And you can look at some primary source stuff from them.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find one right here. No. So Suetonius, well, he says a lot actually, but he says to squelch the rumor, Nero created scapegoats and subjected to the most refined tortures those whom the common people call Christians, a group hated for the abominable crimes. The author of this name, Christ, during the reign of Tiberius, had been executed by the procurator Pontius Pilate. Suppressed for the moment, the deadly superstition broke out again. The superstition he's referring to is that he rose. Not only in Judea, the land which originated this evil, but also in the city of Rome, where all sorts of horrendous and shameful practices from every part of the world converge and are fervently cultivated. So that's Tacitus. And actually what's interesting, I remember last year reading all of the apologetic works from the very first century up to present day, not in totality, but every, Origen, Irenaeus, Tertullian, all the way up through Aquinas and Augustine and, all the way up. But the early apologists and apologetic shifts as time periods, the Middle Age apologists were dealing with certain issues that they're not really our issues today. And the earliest apologists, the main thing they were trying to do was stay alive. They were trying to give apologetic reasons for why you should stop killing Christians. And here's what's interesting. When you read the early apologetic writings like Origen, Justin the Martyr, Tertullian, the case they're making is that, well, first of all, what they're being accused of, Christians were thought to be atheists, which is weird, right? But the reason the Romans thought they were atheists is because they didn't worship the Roman gods. So the rule was you can worship any god you want as long as you also worship the Roman gods. But the only group who wouldn't do that was the Christians. And so they ended up getting tortured. But the thing was, they also believed that they were sexually promiscuous because they would greet each other with a holy kiss. So all these things were being taken out of context, and the Christians were being tortured and worse. And so Justin the Martyr and others are writing saying, look, let me explain what actually is happening. This is what we believe. This is why we do what we do. This is why we eat this weird meal. It's called communion. So they had to explain all these things. But basically they were saying, so now that you understand, could you please stop killing us? And so the misinterpretation of certain things that was happening is actually kind of the reason we have a lot of these other people like Pliny and Tacitus writing anything, because they're trying to figure out how to deal with this weird group called Christians. And you remember that the Christians didn't call themselves Christians. That was not a name they gave themselves. The word Christian's only in the Bible 3 times, and it's always derogatory. So they were called followers of the way. But these things, in a historical sense, the other writers who write about Jesus and the disciples and everything that came with the early church, we're kind of trying to figure out, like, what do we do with these people? They're weird. They do these weird things. They believe weird things. And because of that, they were writing a lot about it. So
cool. Well, I appreciate it. I'll look into those. That's awesome. Because as mentioned earlier, just on the side thread, that I did a study on the resurrection with using Josh McDowell's book, The Evidence of the Resurrection. Awesome book, man. And after that, I was just like, wow, this is just intense. And I recently had a conversation with a coworker who's an agnostic and an atheist at the same time. And that's one of the things I know, it's crazy. That's one of the things that we were talking about is, the resurrection. And I started going through the theories, and it was just red herring after red herring at that point, because they were just breaking down one by one. And
Right.
so these are actually some good sources that, Lord willing, we get back to work in the office after this virus is done, and
Yeah.
I can continue the conversation. So,
And I'm trying to look, Alex, you may know, I'm while you were answering, I'm looking through Cold Case Christianity, Jim Wallace's site. He had an article I remember seeing a long time ago, which provided all of the documentation of references to Christ and resurrection outside of Scripture.
Yeah.
And it was an overwhelming list. I remember that. And do you happen to remember either the name of the article or?
If you search on, because his website is so robust, if you search,
I'm like looking at this now and going, I haven't been out there in a while, and I'm like, dude is like nonstop here.
Man, I told him the other night we were talking, and I was like, man, I got to get to the point where I can pump out content like you. Like, so I'm on the email list. I probably get like 2 YouTube videos a day, or 2 or 3 YouTube videos a week, 3 posts in my email every week. And I know he does other things, but
he does like an article a day.
Yeah.
Give me something good to search for this so we could.
So I'm not sure on his site, but I don't know. I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Nicholas.
Nicholas.
Yeah.
So have you read Cold Case Christianity?
I haven't read that book yet. No.
So put that next on your list, because it'll give. I know it's in that book, but I don't know where on his website it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say, even with your friend at work, if he's really on an honest search for truth, ask if you could read this book together. Like you read it, you talk about a chapter every week, something like that. Because what you may not know, so Jim Wallace was an atheist till he was 35. He used to make fun of Christians. He didn't believe it. And one day he goes to a church and it piques his interest, something somebody said, and he went and bought a Bible, and he bought it to dissect it. I don't know. The book that first got me into apologetics, I was already saved, but I just discovered it, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And it was in the back of my closet. My mom gave it to me. I never read it. And when I started reading it, and if you know Lee Strobel, he was an atheist, and he set out to prove his wife wrong because he was mad that she was becoming a Christian. And in trying to prove her wrong, he proved Christianity was true. And he says this line at the end of that book, and it's the line that always stuck with me. He said, and if you see the movie, it's in picture form. He said, when I looked at it, I had this wall, and I was putting all the evidence up. He was a legal reporter for the Tribune, so he's used to examining eyewitness statements and investigating and all that. He said when he looked at all the evidence on his wall, he said it would actually take more faith not to believe than to believe. And anybody who's on an honest, let's say honest search for truth, if they're really willing to take a look at all the evidence, and to Jim's point, and this is more of the evidential side, like he said, I believe we can prove it true even if we didn't have Scripture. I'm not denying Scripture. I'm not saying don't use it, but that makes it such a strong case that I believe it's accessible to anybody.
So, I'll give you a different angle that I would go.
I know.
Here's how I would go with it, and I maybe it's because I like to have fun. I'd go to your coworker, and he's saying he's an agnostic atheist, and I would just go, "No, you're not." And I was, "Oh, yes, I am." No, God exists. You're just suppressing that in unrighteousness. And then what you do is proceed to ask him how many, blogs he reads on atheism, how many websites he goes to on atheism, how much research he does on atheism and answering Christian arguments. Then ask him how many times he's reading articles against Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or any other religion. And what you typically will find is the only religion they're actually looking to debunk is Christianity.
Right.
That's a good point.
So what I do is when I get them to admit that they've done all this research, I ask them this simple question. Hey, in December, do you go to the mall? Yeah. Do you go outside where they're taking the photos and do you scream that Santa Claus is not real for people? And they always go, no. And I go, why not? And the answer I always get, because everyone knows Santa Claus isn't real. And then I just sit until it sinks in. Sometimes you actually get guys that realize what they just said, because they realize the reason they're doing all this research into attacking Christianity and trying to prove they're an atheist is because they know it's real. If they actually believed what they claimed, if they actually believed that God didn't exist,
they'd be quiet.
Yeah, they wouldn't wait 70, 80 years of life. I'm going to waste that trying to debunk something that's a fairy tale.
Agreed. Yeah.
That's a good point.
You won't see them doing that with Santa Claus. Because everyone knows he's not real. So if everyone knew that that God is not real like they claim, they wouldn't waste so much time. That's a more fun way of doing it as well.
I like that too.
Those are good points.
No, I've actually did that. It was really funny. There's a picture someone has of me doing open air in New York City all day long, asking that question over and over and over. And then there's a picture of a guy that literally, big, jolly looking fellow with a long white beard. And he's right there. And someone captured a picture of me talking with him, and they put it up and they said, capture this, like put a meme to this or capture this. And like everyone who knew what was going on all day was like, you've been because the guy's hands were outstretched. And so the best one was like, you've been asking where I am all day, and here I am. You ask if I exist. But the reality is he's not an atheist.
Right.
He knows God exists. He just suppresses that. And the proof of it is in all the study that he does to prove it.
Yeah.
The other thing to do with them, and you can do this. I've years ago, I used to say this with anyone that's a hardcore atheist. Now you could do it with anyone that is promoting homosexuality. Just ask them what church they grew up in.
Yeah, and with him, that was the first question that I asked. And
what happened in church?
And with him, it was just he grew up Roman Catholic, right? And I'm like, okay, well that answers my question as a Christian. And then he's like, but then I was also Mormon too for my wife's sake, my ex-wife's sake. And I tried to ask him what happened, and again, he just threw out another question to try and fight me on something else, because I don't think he wants to talk about it. Because if he does, right, that truth that he's suppressing, he's going to have to deal with.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and Mormonism, this is the thing with Mormonism. Mormonism will go out of its way to try to debunk Christianity, which is really crazy, because then they say they're Christian.
I know.
We're Christian too. They have a whole campaign. We're Christian too. Wait a minute. You claim the church fell away and you had to restore it. How are you?
I know.
Christian now. It's like the Jehovah's are Christian now. Catholics are Christian now. Everyone wants to be Christian, but they all Catholics haven't denied that. Council of Trent says that we're accursed and sent to hell because of belief of justification by faith alone. So how could we be the same?
Yeah, and living in Utah with Mormon coworkers, and I do evangelism with Luke Wayne and Aaron Sheffield here in Salt Lake, down at Temple Square and stuff.
Good guys.
Luke's actually a really close friend of mine. So
for folks who don't know, Luke Wayne is a blogger. He works at carm.org, Christian Apologetics Research Ministry. And Alex, you could pronounce his last name. I can never pronounce it right. But he's over with Mormon Research Ministry, mrm.org, the best place to get information on Mormonism. He works over there with Bill McKeever and Eric Johnson, two great guys. Don't let them know I said that.
Well, and it's like actually dealing with Mormonism is the thing that actually kind of was like the catalyst getting me into apologetics in the first place. I mean, other than Matt Slick listening to Carm, I guess he would get the full credit, and that might not be a good thing.
That's how Matt got into apologetics as well. You were going to say something, Alex?
No, I was just as he was talking, brought up the guy, your friend who was in the Catholic Church and this and that. So with the whole coronavirus thing, I don't know if you saw this article. The Pope said, since we have to shelter in place, go take your sins directly to God. I was like, fine.
Yeah, I heard that on the podcast from 2 weeks ago, and I just started praying right there. I'm like, Lord, please let this like be the thing
Be
that
the thing,
sinks in. Yeah.
Like I mentioned that on the show when that was done, and I just loved it. I was like, this is great. So basically, the Pope just admitted that the Protestants have been right all along. You could go right to Jesus. It's the Pope, so they can't say he's wrong, right?
I wonder what our old friend the Catholic traditionalist thinks of that now. I wonder if he's reshaped his whole theology.
So Alex, we got a guy that he goes by the term of Catholic traditionalist. He doesn't think the Pope is Catholic, by the way.
Okay.
He's I can't pronounce the term. It's a Saint-Cantitus or whatever. Basically, they believe ever since the Vatican II, the church went off the rails and they're no longer the church. And so you believe in the church that really was the church, which is really messed up, because how do a bunch of people that are not the magisterium, not the author, not the authorities in the church make that determination? Right? If the church decides all that stuff, it's kind of a problem. But yeah, that would be fun. So we've kicked him out of here because he kept he'd ask the same question of every guest apologist. They answered it, and every guest would answer it every week. And then he just was belligerent. So we banned him. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what he says about the Pope saying that. Well, he would. Yeah. My guess is he would just say the Pope's not Catholic, so it doesn't matter.
That's an easy answer.
But then where's your authority head? Because you got to have the authority head over you. So who is his?
Yeah. Okay, let me I'll put Vincent in so he could pronounce the term, because Vincent is typing it out.
No. I'm from the South. I can't pronounce anything right. So it's a sedevacantist. Yeah.
Sedevacantist. Is that right?
Yeah, close as I can get it.
Yeah. Matt knows those things.
Yeah.
He knows too much.
Well, actually, look, you got to understand something. Matt's getting old. He's starting to forget more than he knows. I'm just saying. He even forgot it's Thursday night. You don't see him here, right? He probably forgot.
I thought he got raptured or something. But.
Yeah, well, hey, look, I wouldn't put past Matt to believe in the rapture. I know he does believe in a rapture, just not the way most people do. So, Nicholas, any other questions you got for us tonight?
No, that's it, man. This has been great. And Alex, thanks for sharing what you were sharing earlier on. It was just good to hear some more of that. It was a big encouragement to me and my wife. And Lord willing, with my next question, I'll chime back in, Andrew, and God bless you in your ministry. Yeah. Anyway, I can pray for you guys tonight.
Alex?
I'm always open to it.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'll just state, if you could pray, there's a lot going on in my local church, a lot going on, and this virus stuff is not making it any easier. Yeah. So my pastor, we're a church plant, small church. Pastor was there for 1 year and resigned, and so I have been asked to take over the pulpit ministry for a while. So I've been taken up. We started midweek Bible study in the book of Genesis this week. I'm teaching that. I'm leading a thing on Friday nights, and then handling the pulpit. So, and doing some of the counseling that's been going on. So it's, I guess God's providence, I've learned that last year, I had this weird thing. I'm always traveling in the summer. I mean, basically June to September, October. I mean, like every week I'm on the road. And last year was weird. I had nothing scheduled. And I started thinking like, maybe I should make some phone calls, like get some things scheduled. I don't know. And I just said, you know what? If there's nothing scheduled, God knows better than me. I'll just see what happens. Well, I ended up going in for surgery that I didn't know about, but God did. So, we ended up having similar things going on this year where I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm trying to move to be closer to the church, move into a different state. And so I'm like, all right, well, maybe God knows that I need to be, have time to move. So maybe that's why I don't have too many speaking events. No, it's because there's going to be a coronavirus and I'm going to be speaking every week just at one church. So God knows better than we do. So we should try to force things. It's just trust God. He actually knows what he's doing.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd appreciate prayer for that.
Of course, we'll do.
And you guys are not having to suffer with the kids being cooped up in the house because a 5-month-old just kind of lies
We're
there.
already cooped.
Yeah. Well, we're already cooped and we're already suffering anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's crazy. I think I'm going on like week 4 or 5 of working from home. So it's been crazy. But, mentioning providence and stuff, God's really been using this for good just in my life with my wife and teaching me how to lead her in the word and in prayer and just really, really focus and seek God where I was being lazy and having excuses prior. So,
yeah. Use the time. I mean, people have been asking me, so, how are you dealing with, being at home? And I'm like, well, my wife and I both work out of the house. Like we work side by side in the ministry. And so it's like really not much different. It's just that we can't go out.
Right.
But I'm like, let me get this straight. So I'm forced to stay home with my bride every day. Yeah, I'm call that heaven. Yep, that's great. Heaven on earth.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. I'm like, oh, what's the complaint about? I mean, I got no speaking events. I'm not traveling anywhere. I'm just hanging out with my wife every day. Yep, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think this has shifted some things for a lot of people, but in a good way. And I'm actually hoping, and even as we kind of joked about the thing with the Pope, there's a certain group of people that you're not hearing a lot from right now, except for crazy prophecies and stuff, if you know what I mean. But the prosperity preachers are kind of silent, and a lot of the prophets are kind of silent. And so God has a way. I'm not saying he caused this thing. I'm just saying he can redeem it, though, and redeem the situation. And some of the stuff that needs to fall away is falling away, and I'm hoping it's permanent falling away. But the other thing I think what you said, and what I've tried to focus on myself, and I write a blog about, not necessarily purely about apologetics. It's called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose, because the bigger thing I want to substantiate is that, okay, since God does exist, he has you here for a reason. Figure out what that is. And this is a gift of time. Everybody who said, I didn't have time to read a book, I didn't have time for this, and you have time now. Ironically, I don't actually, because I'm in school full time. And I got, I work from home a lot, but my 2 kids are here now. So that changes it. But there's far worse things to far better people. So I'm not complaining. I'm in the same boat as Andrew. And if anything, just pray for us. We have a 1-year house church that is going strong, and we just pray that it gets stronger, that it grows, that it actually can become a model for people. Because when we come out of this, some church structures may have to change, and we want to be an asset.
We actually are saying, hey, this midweek online might actually work better for people's schedules. But we got a couple minutes left. Vincent, you were in here. Do you have any questions tonight?
Well, let me make a few observations first.
Okay, well, thank you, Vincent. We'll put you in the backstage. Oh, sorry.
First off, I'm glad to see you got rid of all your heretical books behind you.
You see, you're saying MacArthur and Ironside, and
you just need a Bible back there at least. Come on, there's a Bible back there.
All right there. Hold on.
No, it's behind your book. I see.
There you go.
Oh,
there
that's
you go.
a Bible.
And actually, for our friend John Wilkinson, it's the nice, ESV heirloom goat skin that's very nice and soft, buttery, soft. The bust on him.
That's a nice book. Okay.
Now that I took my Bible,
at least you got one real book, one theological book back there. Alex, no, bro, I love what you said tonight, and it reminds me a lot of what I've heard from Vody. I love how Vody comes with this subject, so I'm very appreciative of your take on this. I'm sure you've heard a lot about Vody's stance on all this, and he's one of the ones instrumental in me thinking the same way that you are. So I love my brother Vody there on that.
Amen.
And when it comes to this whole Jesus mythicist stuff, man, you know, one of our friends, Tyler Vaylor, man, he is such an excellent resource on the Jesus mythicist stuff, because he definitely confronts them a lot. Probably a lot more than is published online too, because we deal with it behind the scenes a bit. So
okay,
good stuff. So I appreciate all y'all have done tonight. The only thing I would like to add is, like, what do these people think that, you know, the whole of history, everything we mark our time by is on Jesus? I mean, a lot of people try to ignore or say common error. Well, what's the common error that we're talking about?
You can't get away from it.
What is all of history judged or counted by?
Yeah, it's a great point, and you know, it's like you said, it's just overlooked. They don't even address it. They don't deal with it. You know, what is AD? A lot of people probably don't even know what AD means. But we know, and like you said, whether you say common era or not, it's still a demarcation point, based on a carpenter from nowhere who built nothing. So why are we even talking about him in the first place? I asked this question one time. I was doing a Q&A. I was like, can anyone else name a carpenter from the first century by name?
Joseph,
in Palestine.
Jesus' father, Joseph.
And that right there, I wasn't ready for that answer. And one of my guys said, because it was one of my friends, he said, his dad. I was like, daggone it, that's right. But you get my point, right? We can't, I mean, Nazareth is
you only know about Joseph because of Jesus.
There you go. Right. There we go. And so, yeah, to your point, man, there's no way around certain aspects of this whole conversation. The point we want to get people to come to, and I love, Andrew, what you're doing with Open Air and even with the show, because the Bible's clear, and this is where we align, because I always come back to Scripture. I was a pastor before I was an apologist, and every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. The thing is, you either bow on this side or the next. But if you bow on the next, you don't get back up. I want to bow the knee to him, to the King, now, while I have the opportunity to do so. And all I want, and I know there's people who are going to perpetually disagree, but I'm not trying to convince you of my truth, that crazy lingo we hear nowadays. Greg Koukl has a book called The Story of Reality. This is simply this simply outlines what actually happened in real time in real history. I'm not giving you my opinion. We're not giving you our opinion. We're giving whoever's listening and whoever we talk to in life, these are the events that occurred. Now, what you do with that is up to you. But my sincere hope, our sincere hope, all of us here, is that we want you to say, okay, just like Andrew said, you know what? The math doesn't work out. This can't be fake. If you look at, and the same thing you said, there's a number called Skewer's number. I think it's 1 in 10 to the 130th. It's the number where mathematicians stop counting. And when you look at all the prophecies, not just pertaining to Jesus, but pertaining to the kingdom divisions of 4 to 2 to 1, all the prophecies, the chances of all of those prophecies coming true exceeds Skewer's number. There's no way to make this up. So like me, anybody who comes to this with an honest, open vantage point or heart, and says, let me just look at it and let me examine it based on what is documented. And when you do that, you're like, man, this doesn't, I really want to find a way around this, but I just can't. There's no way that Isaiah could have known, and there's no way Jeremiah could have known about this. There's just no way. And with the more recent history of the New Testament, which is more testable, it's even more to the case that the evidence backs up Scripture. So, yeah, the Jesus mythicists, I don't even, some people, I don't even know what to say. I do prison ministry. I'll give you a real quick example. I teach in jail normally when I can, twice a month. Cook County Jail is the largest jail in the country here in Chicago. And we go into the pod, we go into Division 9, which is max security. And we go into their housing unit, not to the chapel. We go in where they live. And I'm teaching one day, and the one guy's like, hey, I need you to come talk to my cellmate. And in jail, the last place I would expect to find somebody, this guy was a flat earther. And he was like, go to this website. I can show you this. And I was like, I'm not even going to debate this with you. I have flown halfway around the world. I'm not going to debate this with you. So yeah, some people, like Andrew said, they're suppressing the truth, and some just suppress it harder than others.
That's right. Yeah. So, Alex, I'm glad you came on. I appreciate, it's fun, good discussion, good for the time that it is. Everyone thought, a bunch of people thought that we planned this because of Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. And I went,
nope.
No, actually, Alex said he wanted to come in. I said, what are some topics that you like talking about? And you said proof of God, or evidence for God and evidence for the resurrection. Mm-hmm. I figured, okay, if we do evidence for God, you and I may disagree a lot on the show, so let's just go with evidence of resurrection. And
fair enough.
And then everyone was like, "Oh, so you did that because of Resurrection Sunday?" I said, "Actually, no, I didn't. That didn't even hit me till you said something." All the great planning I do. So yeah, but it was good having you on. Vince, do you have anything else?
No, I just it would be a good discussion on the timing issue on Good Friday, but that's another topic for another day. Yeah. But I appreciate you guys, and God bless everyone. Yeah.
Yep. Appreciate you too.
Put your faith in the Lord. That's the only thing that'll save you.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, Alex, it was good having you on. Let me just put up for folks your website one more time for folks is Alex R.
McElroy.
McElroy. So it's ALEXRMCELROY.com. So check that out. I'll put that in the show notes and in the description. And so check out his stuff, see what he's doing, be an encouragement to him. Go you have a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, it's just my name, Alex McElroy. I'm getting going more with it, but if you go to the Alex R. McElroy website, you can get to my YouTube channel, you can get to the blog, that's the catch-all. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Jess is saying she missed that. It was hard. Let me put that back up for her. So I'll leave that up so you can write that down, because she doesn't want to wait till the show drops tomorrow or, the podcast. Jess has got Jess is like one of the she does a lot of commenting on every week, and yet she never comes in and asks a question. She types it out. I don't know. I think she's afraid. That's my theory.
No problem.
That's scary. Am I, Alex?
Not at all. Okay. This has been fun. This has been great. And Jess, feel free. I think my email is there. If you want to email me from the website, that's fine too.
All right. So, with that, it is fitting to wish everyone a good Resurrection Sunday. Well, a good Friday.
Yes.
Okay. That sounds repetitive, but I wish everyone a good Resurrection Sunday. It is going to be different for a lot of folks, as many of us cannot meet corporately other than virtually, and so we're praying that this this passes soon. And my encouragement to all you guys, as you think about what's going on and all, when we come out of this, when we're on the other side of this, you're seeing right now a lot of people who are at home. We know that alcohol consumption is up 55%. Pornography consumption, they say, is up, I think someone said 25 to 30%.
Wow.
Okay. The places where marijuana is legal, the consumption is up there as well. So there's a lot of people sitting at home, drinking, watching pornography, playing video games. They're wasting their time doing stuff like this. And when we get out of this, there's going to be a whole lot of people in need, because they're they're creating a lifestyle they can't get back to when they have to go to work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are asking questions with all this. And my encouragement to everyone listening, think about how you can start sharing the gospel virtually now. You could, there's ways that you will be able to share the gospel. Yeah, I liked what on our Theology Throwdown podcast, for those who are familiar with the Christian podcast community, where we gather together, we have our monthly podcast. And basically what we have there is we all got discussing this virus thing. And James Watkins made a point that you can share the gospel without even talking to someone, without even, touching someone or handing them a gospel tract. He just takes his phone and airdrops the back of a gospel tract, and people accept it. He just airdrops it. Boop. Just anyone that has airdrop open, he just sends it to them and just shares the gospel. That's something you could do. Now, you might have to be within, 6 feet. I don't know how close you have to be for airdrop to work, but find creative ways to share the gospel, because when we get on the other side of this, when we get out of this, there's going to be a lot of hurting people. And we Christians take the time now to study your Bible so that when we come out of this, you have answers for people, because there are going to be a lot of people asking a lot of questions, and we're the ones that have the answer. So we need to be ready for that. We need to be out there we need to be hitting the streets. It's going to be different. Handing out tracts is going to be different, I think. I don't think people are going to be taking gospel tracts anymore like they used to, at least. And for some places, some people found that was hard. It's going to be harder to just start up conversations with people and be in close proximity, at least for a while. Maybe that's the advantage of open air. But we got to find some ways, because we need to get the gospel out to these people. Could this be something that God is going to use, this worldwide pandemic, to bring about another worldwide revival? Could be. But you know what? Revival starts with me. You got to understand that it always starts with us individually getting right with God. And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that we have to get saved. I mean, if you're not saved, then yes, that would be. But we need to take this time that we're home, do some self-evaluation, start examining what things are in your life that you need to clean up. Maybe there's things you need to, like Nicholas was saying, he just needed to start spending more time in the Bible, leading his wife. This is the time to develop those patterns. This is the time for us to get serious with God, with sin in our life, address that, because when we're all being brokenhearted before God, not worrying about the politics and the economics and all that other stuff, but worrying about Christ and what he's doing, that's when you could see a revival. That's what I'm praying for. I hope you'd pray that with me, guys. I hope that you'd be praying that God will use this to bring about a worldwide revival, that his name would be glorified among the lands. Now, maybe that he's doing this because he's bringing about the end times. Who knows? But, for all the people that want to speculate on that, here's the simple thing we do know. God's in control. He doesn't command us to sit at home and worry about the end times and worry and think about, all the speculations we could do, what God could be doing. He does command us to go out and make disciples. And a person who doesn't know Christ, the first thing you do is share the gospel. They need to know that they are sinners and criminals in God's sight, because we all break his law. They need to know that they need to turn from trusting himself as a good person, they're trusting their good works. They need to turn to Christ to have eternal life. And they're going to have challenges when you share that with them. You need to be ready to answer those. And now's the time to be prepared. Now's the time. You have extra time on your hands. Stop binge watching all the Netflix and just get into the Word of God and study. It will be the most valuable way you could spend this time being cooped up in home. And so that'd be my encouragement to folks. Alex, let me let you, anything else you want to plug or sign off with?
No, I appreciate this time, and I appreciate you having me on. Oh, I will say my online course, Bibliology, will be May 4th, 7 to 9 Central Time. It's just bibliology.eventbrite.com. I believe you can just go into Eventbrite and type in bibliology.
Is that a free event or is it a charged event?
No, it's $22.
$22.
Yep.
Okay, 22.
Yep.
Not 20. There's reasons people have for doing numbers like that. What was yours?
I was just pricing out the workload and pricing out the amount of people I can get in one room on the channel, and so that was what I came up with. I don't know.
99 because you get just under 20 and they think it's less than 20, and 22 it's more memorable, so people would remember that.
Maybe.
You had said earlier, the Word of Faith guys are silent. They actually haven't been. It's really kind of funny that they've been out there, and a friend of mine just
certain ones
doing some videos, about this with all of them. They all claimed 2020 year of vision.
I know.
Someone had said, I forget who said this now, but it was a great line. All the Word of Faith guys claim that this was the 2020 year of vision, and yet none of them saw this coming.
I got a better one. I posted a meme maybe a week or two ago, and it was one of those memes where it was just a guy like that or something, and I was like, so this is how I feel. All the prophets, you didn't see this coming?
Yeah.
Like no one? We couldn't get a heads up?
All right. Well, I thank you for coming on, Alex. Thanks for all of the study you've put in and the help that it's been to us. I appreciate it. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. As I put Alex in the back room, I'm going to just, and you could stick around, I'm going to play that 8-minute clip to close us out, and then we'll close the show. The clip that we had from a previous Apologetics Live with Matt Slick, with Bob, who wants scientific proof that God exists. It's actually about 9 minutes long. Hope you enjoy this, and we'll see you next week.
Do you have any proof that your God exists?
Yeah, the resurrection of Jesus is the proof.
That's not.
Yeah, it is.
No, do you have empirical evidence?
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay, what's empirical evidence?
Do you have evidence that's been performed through the scientific method? Anything peer reviewed by the scientists? Anybody with PhD? Anything like that?
So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Is your statement, your requirement, is that the right approach?
My statement is that it corresponds with the accurate description of reality.
So do you know that the scientific method is a philosophy?
Of course, science comes from philosophy. It does have.
Do you know that it is a philosophy? Did you know?
Method?
Yes.
It may be that, but it's also the only accurate approach we have to.
How do you know it's
nature of reality?
How do you know it's the only accurate way?
It's the way that the entire scientific community has agreed upon as a way to answering the questions of the nature of reality.
So that's called the argumentum ad populum. So the majority has agreed, so therefore it's true.
Okay, but my question was, what evidence do you have for your God?
I told you. You said you want empirical evidence, and so
resurrection is not evidence. That's just something.
But wait, Bob. Before we can get there, you first have to show that your statement has been peer reviewed.
I have a simple question. I just want to know whether your God exists.
The resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, well, prove do you have a scientific theorem?
Okay, then you're asking a different question. Which question do you want to ask? Because you're changing it up.
What scientific evidence do you have that your God exists?
Don't make me explode on this guy too.
Okay, hold on. Okay, slow down, please. Slow down. Okay, what's your name? Bob. Okay, Bob. So, Bob, what you are demanding is your personal preference.
I want evidence.
Okay, you want evidence for God.
Yes,
And
don't give me the resurrection.
Can you please let me finish? It's always nice.
Answer the question.
If you're going to use foul language, I will remove you immediately. Right? If you're going to be rude and cut him off when he's answered your question several times, the fact that you don't like the answer doesn't mean it's not an answer.
That's not the answer. I don't like it. Doesn't matter.
Bob.
Yes, sir.
Come on.
You asked the question. You asked him, "What's the evidence?" He gave you the evidence.
That's not evidence.
Bob. You asked him a question. He gave you an answer.
That's not an accurate.
Well, Bob,
let me get in
Bob,
here.
is there any answer you would accept?
Yes.
Yeah. What?
point to something observable, mathematical.
Okay, observable by like 500 people, say?
Observable by, or why not?
Okay, that's the resurrection.
How do you observe something that happened over 2,000 years ago?
Resurrection is not evidence.
John, hold on.
Guys, too many chefs in the kitchen.
Let me ask Bob a question. Bob, was George Washington our first president? Yes or no?
Yes, he was. And because of the fact that
Prove it by the scientific.
Because we're alive today, was it observed on something?
No, what I'm doing is
We need to move on past this guy. We're not going to get anywhere with him.
yeah, I know, but I want to.
We don't get anywhere with the poll.
Hold on, man. So here's the thing, Bob. What I'm doing is I'm giving you the right method of study for this topic at hand. You
Just give me
don't
evidence
use
for your
science,
thought.
Bob.
Let's turn it on him. He's an
Bob,
atheist.
try to listen. Try to
Yeah,
listen.
I'm a proud atheist too.
Okay, you got a scientific proof that atheism is true?
Atheism is a lack of belief.
It's a lack of belief.
Lack of
Then the
belief.
back scratcher in my hand is an atheist. It lacks belief.
Well, then in that case,
Okay. We need to move on because we're not going to get anywhere with someone who cannot think critically and is full of vitriol and anger.
But Matt, hold on.
No, sir, Bob, we try to talk with you and you constantly interrupt and we try and
for your God existing.
and see you keep interrupting, Bob.
Show me the evidence for your God.
Matt, I'm gonna turn it down to a bit and then we'll turn them up.
Yeah.
This will be helpful. Bob, I'm gonna ask you the question. I'll turn your volume back up. Okay. And here's gonna be the question I want you to answer. Ready?
Go ahead.
I want you to tell me how many feet 8 pounds of feathers weigh.
How many feet? 8 pounds? I don't know.
Yeah, it's because the wrong measurement. You don't measure weight in feet, do you?
Okay, that's fine. So what's your point?
Okay, so the point is you don't measure history by science.
So you don't measure
When I-
God by scientific realm either?
Bob, try listening, okay? So
Bob,
I asked you
put
about
away
George
your anger,
Washington.
Bob.
I asked you about George Washington for a
your
reason.
Yeah, you asked me about George Washington because you're trying to say that because they're alive, can't prove he exists. Stupid.
No.
Yes, it is very stupid to say. Now you're denouncing.
Okay,
you're denying him.
No,
Brother.
Bob, this is classic, Bob.
It is fine.
You want proof for something. We give you history because
You
history
said the resurrection
is history.
not
That's
evidence.
history.
The Bible is
Okay.
not history, my friend.
Okay.
Okay, we can't talk to this guy. The Bible's not history. No matter
The
what
Bible
we
is not
say,
history, my friend.
no matter what we say, he's just going to refuse it. It doesn't
No
make
matter
any
what I
difference.
say, you're still going to believe
but
your
it's-
sky
but
God.
Yeah,
this
it
is-
doesn't matter.
The thing is where this is great. This is great because this is what so many people do, and people like Bob can't see it.
People
They
like you
can't
can't see things either.
Bob,
Seriously,
the
move on.
reason you can't allow anyone to finish
Let's move on.
is because of the fact that you can't defend your own claims. Matt just did that with you, and you couldn't
You
defend
can't
it.
defend
You
me either.
want to-
Prove to me that your God
He
We can't
did
prove
that.
it to you because
Exactly. You can't
what
prove
you
it.
would
There's
accept
no-
for
you're lost.
because Bob, because
You're
what you would
lost.
accept because you won't accept anything we have. You have
Because
a
your
very
evidence is
narrow
not
view. I
evidence.
was trying to
It's
show
not
you that your
evidence.
narrow view was
Resurrection
inaccurate. It
is
was the
not
wrong
evidence,
one.
my friend.
It's just subjective preferences on your part.
The
And
resurrection
you hate
is
God.
not
You're not
evidence,
interested
my
in God.
friend.
You want to justify your own atheism. And you don't argue from a lack of position, Bob. You argue from what you believe in, not what you lack
You argue
belief
from-
in.
you believe in-
You
see, you
deny
believe that
God.
the
You
resurrection
openly
is
deny
not
him, and you hate him. You want your own sovereignty.
Resurrection
Now, the
is
proof
not
that God
evidence.
exists is the very fact that your hatred of him constitutes evidence
I hate
that the
something I don't
scriptures are
believe in.
true.
That's so
That judgment is upon your heart and your mind for your hatred of him
I hate
and
you,
you're
God,
wanting to
which
be
I
in
don't
his
believe in.
place. Just as the scriptures teach, your very denial and your hatred are evidence for
wow.
God's existence
Yes,
because
I hate God
the
that I don't
judgment
believe in.
by him upon your heart is very
I hate
evident.
God, I hate Christ, and I hate
No,
Muslims.
Matt,
I hate all
here's
you
the
guys.
thing, and maybe we'll turn them up again after.
Sure.
But here's the thing that we end up seeing with this, and we see this with countless people. Okay, he wants you to use science to explain something that
Yes.
not determined by science. It's determined
Right.
by history. It's determined by philosophy.
That's
He's
not
using the
true.
wrong measurement. But
That's
then
not
when you
true.
turn it on him and put it in the same caliber, asking George Washington, he's like, "Well, that's history." Well, that's exactly right, and he
Right.
can't use his own standard or anything else. So he wants a standard for you to prove God exists, but he wants it only by a science standard. Now, here's the reason, Bob, and I want you to listen. Here's why you can't use science to prove God.
Okay, that's
Very simple. Science is the proper measurement of the natural world. Science is the study of the material world.
Yes.
God is not material. He's
You have no evidence
immaterial.
for this.
You
have no
can't
evidence
use
for this.
science to
You're making
prove
this up
God
as you go along.
exists
You have no
any more
evidence
than
for
you
this
can
God
use
you're talking
science to prove that you love your wife.
Or that
You
his
have
soul
no
exists.
evidence for what you're saying.
Correct.
Or
Exactly.
my thoughts
So-
exist. Right. He's not interested
Bob-
in truth. He's
It's
interested
like you're
in
not
denial.
interested. You're settling this notion of
So,
Jesus
Bob,
and God.
Let's just
There's
move
no
on,
evidence
guys.
for it.
Seriously. Seriously.
We're almost done. You know,
Okay,
but
we're
it is the thing. So, Bob, can you prove scientifically that you love your wife if you're married?
No, just like
because
you can't prove scientific God.
correct.
We
Why?
don't use
Because
science for God.
Critical fallacy, Bob. You're
God is
using
not
the wrong
outside of
measure.
space and time, my friends. I'm sorry. It's just your little
So-
made up sky God.
Whatever, dude. Whatever. Let's
Whatever,
move
dude.
along, guys. I'm going
Right,
to bow
move on.
out because I don't want to waste
Yeah.
my time with someone who's full of hatred, who cannot reason properly, who makes unreasonable demands. You know, there's just no
Yes, I
sense
demand
of going
that you
on.
prove what you
If he
say.
were polite in our conversation, we could work through things, but we can't
Okay.
because he's interrupting constantly and he's full of hatred. So why
And,
bother?
and this is the thing for folks who want. All right, this is the problem when someone someone cannot engage and can't deal honestly with what people say, it reveals that they can't defend their own position. And Matt, you tried to do that with him. You turned it on him to say, okay, let's take your same position and, support it with his atheism. He couldn't do it. What did he do? He tried to say, oh, it's a non-belief, as if that's his cop-out, because he can't defend his own position. And this is what we see with atheists all the time, that it's a non-belief, but it isn't a non-belief. You can prove negative all day long.
No, you can't.
I can easily prove the statement. There's no tea in China just by producing tea in China. You can prove a negative. It's easy to do.
I can't prove unicorns don't exist.
The thing is he doesn't have a negative thing. It's not a lack of belief that he's got. It's, as you're hearing, he doesn't want to even accept the right measurement to define these things. Okay, you don't use the study of the material world to study something that's not material. You can't prove that's true. It doesn't mean God doesn't exist, Bob. It means that you have a fallacy. You're using the wrong measurement. It is like trying to measure the weight of something in feet. It's a ridiculous statement. And that's why both Matt and I tried to talk to you, but you wouldn't hear it. And I know that you'll probably run off and claim, in victory for having gotten Matt upset. But the reality is Matt tried to patiently talk to you. You were rude, inconsiderate, and not logical in the basic thing, right? You asked a question and you got an answer. You didn't like the answer.
He gave me a non-answer.
Matt gave you an answer. So to claim he didn't answer it, he did. You just don't like it because you wanted to use the wrong measurement.
He gave me a non-answer.
So with that, we'll end. We